Hello, students. Welcome to your first digital lesson on romantic poetry. Hopefully at this point, if you are here, then you have already watched the video that describes the major elements of romantic literature, and you have read the poem Thanatopsis by William Cullen Bryant at least twice. What I'm going to do today is walk you through an analysis of this poem and sort of go line by line to make sure you understand what the poem is about and give you some helpful hints for annotation. And then you're going to practice this skill with a different poem. So we're going to use Thanatopsis as a model, and then you're going to do something similar on your own with a different romantic poem. All right, so without further ado, we are going to look at Thanatopsis, and hopefully you have this poem in front of you. If you were able to print it out, that's great. And if you're able to do that, you can annotate the old-fashioned way with paper and pencil and a highlighter. Or if you would like to annotate through an online platform, the easiest is to use a Google Doc. So if you open the assignment, or if you open the poem in Google Classroom, open it up as a Google Doc, and then you'll be able to edit it. You can highlight it, you can add comments in the margins, interact with the text just as you would with paper and pencil. So those are your two options for doing your annotations, and just do whatever makes the most sense for you. A couple of things to remember when you annotate poetry. There are certain things that you should look for and mark as you go through a poem. So the first is figurative language. So if you don't remember what that is, remember that figurative language is similes, metaphors, personification, hyperbole. Any language that's not meant to be taken literally is figurative language. Usually it implies something about the subject of the poem without directly stating it. Poets are notorious for doing this. You also want to look for words that stand out or words that are unfamiliar. So diction is important. Pay attention to the poet's word choice. You should write summaries and recaps in the margins. So if you're doing this digitally, this is where you will add comments. So you just highlight a part of a text and click the plus sign to add a comment in the margin. In addition to that, you can write questions. So things that make you think or things that you don't understand, those are all valid things that you can write down. You also want to look for in these poems those reflections of romantic elements. So thinking back to the video that you watched, the 5 major characteristics of romantic literature are imagination and escapism, individuality, finding spirituality in nature, looking to the past for wisdom, and finding a hero in the common man. The poetry that we're going to read today will reflect some, if not all, of those romantic elements. All right, so looking at Thanatopsis, and I'm sort of chunked this by the different line numbers, which are marked for you on that Google Doc. So when you first look at the first 10 lines of this poem, you should look for feminine pronouns. So if you look for her and she, and then also descriptions of nature, we see this personification of nature as a woman. She has a voice of gladness. She has a smile and eloquence of beauty. She glides. So through this diction, we see that nature is personified as a woman. Then we have a bit of a shift. The author starts to think about thoughts of the last bitter hour. Basically what this means, what he is referring to here, is what happens when you start to think about your last bitter hour, and that really bums you out. So when you start to think about death and it starts to upset you, what should you do? The author has an answer to that in lines 11 through 30. He starts by giving us lots of death imagery. So we see in line 11, stern agony and shroud and pall, darkness, narrow house. So when you start thinking about all of these things, all of these dark death images, what should you do when you feel sad about this? You should go forth under the open sky and list to nature's teachings. Listen to nature. So go into nature when you're feeling sad about your mortality. And when you go into nature, you will hear a, quote, still voice. This still voice will calm you. This is the author's advice to his readers. We should take comfort in this knowledge that earth that nourished thee shall claim thy growth to be resolved to earth again. Put this into your own words in the margins. He also says, sort of continuing that idea, you should highlight this line if you want to, shalt thou go to mix forever with the elements. Okay, so moving on to the second half of the poem, lines 31 to 45. Obviously, this poem, the subject matter is pretty dark. You know, he's talking about death and how we should be, the readers should not be too afraid of that, because when we die, we're going to be returned back to the earth. But we should not just take comfort in that, Bryant says. He says we should take comfort because yet not to thine eternal resting place shalt thou retire alone. So in other words, you're not going to be alone. You're going to be amongst patriarchs and kings and the powerful of the earth, the wise, the good, the fair. He refers to the earth as a sepulcher, a grave, or a tomb that we all are returned to. He continues this idea with the line, the great tomb of man. We see more nature imagery in the second half of this poem as well. He refers to the golden sun, the planets, the infinite host of heaven, the wilderness and continuous woods. And he also asks a question. So yes, throughout this poem, he's explaining how there should be comfort in the fact that you return to the earth in death. But he asks another question that's sort of bothering him. What if thou withdraw in silence from the living, and no friend take note of thy departure? What if no one notices when you're gone? He says, find comfort because all that breathe will share thy destiny. All people will eventually return to the earth. That's the nature of mortality. And you will be remembered because you are of the earth. Again, that same idea, continued here, shall come and make their bed with thee. The very end of the poem, he gives us some advice. He tells us to live. So live, he says. Basically, live life to the fullest. Carpe diem. He says, go not like the quarry slave at night, scourged to his dungeon, but instead with this knowledge we should greet death sustained and soothed, and approach thy grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams. So death shouldn't be this big scary thing that bums you out, according to Bryant. It should be something that we can take comfort in that we will be returned to the earth, and also that we will not be alone. So obviously this reflects many of the ideas in Romantic poetry, namely the importance of nature, also the significance of the individual. This definitely celebrates the individual's role as extremely important in the world, not just when you're living, but also in your death.